meeting will now come to order. Welcome to the February 8th, 2021 meeting of the City of Raleigh Board of Adjustment. My name is Rodney Swink and I'm chair of the board. I'm joined by my fellow commissioners, John Kuntz, vice chairman, Donald Miles, secretary, Kathy Rudisell, Justin Sutton, Marvin Butler, Stephen Kinney, and Michael Rainey.
Morning.
The Board of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial body that is governed by the North Carolina General Statutes and the city's Unified Development Ordinance. We conduct evidentiary hearings on requests for variances, design adjustments, design alternates, and special use permits, among other requests. The Board of Adjustment assures that the due process rights of the parties are protected when hearing cases. Since today's meeting will be conducted remotely, in addition to the general quasi-judicial rules, today's hearings will be conducted in accordance with state statutes that allow for more remote quasi-judicial evidentiary hearings during the current COVID-19 states of emergency. All presentations, documents, exhibits, or other materials that we submitted at today's evidentiary hearings were posted online in board docs prior to this meeting. These materials can be viewed at any time during today's meeting by visiting www.raleighNC.gov/board-adjustment and clicking the link to view the agenda. If at any time a participant has issues with the technology, please send a message to the moderator. Chat function has been disabled for this meeting for all participants and the board members, except for the ability to message the moderator if you have technical difficulties. Before we begin the evidentiary hearings on today's agenda, I ask our attorney to briefly explain for the participants how we will be conducting today's evidentiary hearings.
My name is Janie Richardson, and I will be the attorney for the Raleigh Board of Adjustment today and over the next few months while Catherine Hill is out on maternity leave. Today's evidentiary hearings will proceed very similar to a regular meeting with a few minor adjustments. First, all witnesses must be sworn in. Because of the remote format, individuals who signed up to speak, as well as city staff participants, have already signed a written oath form, which will be reaffirmed on the record as they testify today. The participants have also already provided written consent to today's remote meeting. We'll begin with a staff presentation and report from a member of the planning department. As a reminder, the standards the applicant must meet for approval are in the UDO. They are also set forth in the staff report and the applicant's application. The standard will be discussed by staff and the applicant throughout the hearing. The burden is on the applicant to provide competent material and substantial evidence as to each of the required standards to be granted the request. Following staff's presentation, the applicant will be acknowledged to present their case and witnesses. The board will acknowledge the attorney or applicant for each case first as the point person for the applicant. Following the applicant, any opponents will be given the opportunity to speak. The applicant then has the opportunity for any rebuttal and or closing statement. When all testimony is complete, we'll close the evidentiary hearing. The board members will then deliberate and vote on the case of fact and conclusions of law. The decision will be incorporated into today's meeting minutes and will be adopted at the same time the meeting minutes are adopted.
Okay, we will now conduct the evidentiary hearings on today's agenda. As our attorney stated, the standard the applicant must meet to be granted their request is set forth in the UDO, and the board's decisions must be based upon competent, material, and substantial evidence related to the applicable standard. In the interest of efficiency, if you will be speaking in a hearing today, please focus your testimony and arguments on the applicable standard, not personal preference or opinion. Witnesses may testify as to facts to which they are competent to testify, so long as those facts relate to the legal standards. In addition, lay or non-expert witness testimony is limited to facts, not opinions. Focusing your testimony and arguments on the applicable facts and standards will allow the board to hear cases in an efficient and timely manner. Okay, let's begin with evidentiary hearing 1. This is 5312 Atlantic Springs Road, MRH Investment Group LLC property owner. It's a variance BOA-0011-2020. I'll begin by swearing in the staff. Keegan McDonald, our planning staff case presenter.
Present.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Justin Rometta, zoning administrator.
Present.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. As to our participants, when I call your name, please state your name and address for the record, and I will reaffirm your oath. Jeff Smith, applicant.
Yeah.
You state your name and address, please.
Address 1107 East Gear Street, Durham, North Carolina.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McDonald, it's up to you.
All right, thank you. So I'll just begin by providing a fairly brief overview of the request. So this is a property located on Atlantic Springs Road near the intersection with Atlantic. The request specifically is a variance to the maximum height requirements for low profile ground signs. There is an already existing and constructed sign on the site which is serving a vehicle service use. And the sign was constructed, I believe, in late 2018. Due to a changeover in staff, there was potential miscommunication about the approval of said sign. And nonetheless, the sign was constructed prior to receiving a permit for approval. And thus they're required to now go through board variance process, to receive a variance to the height of the sign, which doesn't qualify as a low profile ground sign. So the exact variance is 4 feet 10 inches. The standard is 3 feet 6 inches. So the total height of the sign is 8 feet 4 inches. Property in this case is zone CX3 PL. That PL frontage is key such that it limits what types of ground signs can be constructed. Generally speaking, in a CX district, you would be permitted a medium and high profile ground sign. However, the PL frontage is designated more for areas where access to buildings by the automobile is desired, but where some level of walkability is maintained. So there is somewhat of a higher value placed on the pedestrian experience. There's also an understanding generally that buildings would be located closer to the street such that you would have kind of dual wall signage and ground signage. Thus, a larger ground sign is not typically warranted. And so that's the reason that it's limited to only this low profile, which is a height of 3.5 feet. So here's the sign plan that was provided by the applicant, showing the overall structure and where it would be located on the site. I think the applicant has provided some photos in their presentation that kind of show it in its current day, but or its current state, excuse me. But as you can see from the image, even during kind of preparation and construction of the site, that this particular sign does sit down somewhat below grade, at least from the street level. So there is a topography element necessitating potentially necessitating a larger sign in terms of providing best viewing from the road for those driving by. So that I think is related to the nature of their specific request. Here is just where the sign is located. So as they've noted, there's specific setback requirements for signs, and they are constrained in some circumstance by where to put the sign, and also again by those natural site features, namely topography, which has the sign located in a somewhat lower area of elevation compared to the rest of the site, and specifically also the roadway. Here is the sign table 732. So what I've highlighted, that column lists allowable signage in the PL frontage, and just wanted to note again for your reference that medium and high profile ground signs, which are allowed to be taller than 3.5 feet, are not permitted based on the sign table. Low profile ground signs are permitted. The applicant is requesting a variance solely to the height of the sign. It will comply with all of the other standards for low profile ground signs, or it does comply, I should say. with all their standards. So this is just a variance to that specific height requirement. And I just wanted to note where that was located in the ordinance for you all. And here is the low profile ground sign standards. So again, sign will be is in full compliance with everything listed herein except for B2 height max. The sign as constructed is 8 feet 4 inches instead of the allowable 3.5 or 3 foot 6 inches. So staff does not have many comments other than what's already been stated to the variance criteria. I will just note for variance criteria number 2, we did want to note that there are other properties in the vicinity, specifically along Atlantic Avenue and Atlantic Springs Road, that carry the PL frontage, similarly limiting the types of allowed signage, specifically what types of ground signs are permitted. I know the applicant, I believe, has in their presentation some other nearby properties that contain larger signs. I just want to comment that, you know, I did not have the history related to those other signs, but this frontage requirement has been applied by our newest sign permitter and also verified by the zoning administrator that is indeed a requirement, again, necessitating the variance for the specific sign in the specific property. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to try to answer any questions if there are any for me. If not, I'm happy to pass it off to the applicant.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. McDonald from the board? Okay, let's move to the applicant. Let me remind you that the evidence and legal arguments need to be presented in support of the request. Please apply them to the applicable standards. Mr. Worth, Mr. Mills, excuse me, welcome.
Good afternoon.
I was due to do that eventually. I'm glad I got it out of the way.
It's okay. It's quite all right. If you need me to state my address and reaffirm the oath, I'm happy to do that now.
That's not necessary, but thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Mr. Swink, and good afternoon to the rest of the board. As Keegan mentioned, this is a request to legalize an existing sign at 5312 Atlantic Springs Road that exceeds the maximum height of a low profile ground sign. The hardship is caused by the site's topography, making a standard low profile ground sign virtually impossible for vehicular traffic. Legalizing the existing sign provides adequate advertising and is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the PL sign regulations, such that public safety is ensured and substantial justice is achieved. Next slide, please. So Keegan referenced this slide as well, but 5312 Atlantic Springs Road is a 1.2 acre parcel situated near the intersection of Atlantic Springs Road and Atlantic Avenue. It is zone CX3PL, and as Keegan mentioned, that PL frontage only allows the low profile ground sign and does not allow for either the medium or high profile ground signs that would better serve this property. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, this is a photo recently after the sign was erected. And as you can see here again, the grade from the sidewalk and the street where it would be visible and the grade at which the sign sits is a pretty significant difference, such that a low profile sign would not be able to be seen from the street. Next slide, please. So again, this slide here has the sign dimensions, and just wanted to reiterate that the sign does conform with all of the low profile ground sign standards, but for its height. And again, just to reiterate, we are not trying to max out the sign regulations. We just want to allow the applicant to have a sign that is visible for its patrons. This is a auto body repair shop, and so we do understand the need for the PL regulations and enhancing the pedestrian experience, but we also have to realize that all of the customers for this Napa Auto Care Center are going to be traveling by car, and when we don't have an adequate sign, that's going to cause traffic to have to double back because they missed the sign on the first go around, or they're going to have to slam on the brakes by the time they do see the sign in order to make their turn. And so having a higher than normal low profile ground sign here does increase public safety, and it allows drivers to find that turn on their first trip down Atlantic Springs Road. Next slide, please. So again, the hardship in this instance is related to the topography, and specifically that topography from the road to the sign itself. So this photo here I took last week, and this is turning from Atlantic Avenue onto Atlantic Springs. And it's a little difficult to tell, but in the kind of in the middle of the photo, that blue box, that is the Napa Auto Parts sign as it sits today. And I think it's worth noting that when you view this sign from, the intersection, I'm sorry, is everybody having difficulty hearing me? Yes, okay. I'll try to readjust. Sorry, one second. All right, is this any better? Not particularly. Sorry.
Worth, you may want to try to reconnect, and I'll make sure to unmute you when you come back in to see if that corrects the problem.
Okay, thank you. All right, sorry about that. Is this audio any better?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that delay. Okay, to start where we left off. So again, I do think it's important to note that when you view the sign from the Atlantic Avenue intersection, it does appear, at first glance as a low profile ground sign. You don't see the podium on which it sits. Next slide, please. And again, you can just see as you get closer, the sign becoming more visible. Next slide, please. And then one more. Thank you. And I took this photo right in front of the sign just to, again, highlight that grade separation between the sidewalk and the sign itself. I did want to note, as Keegan mentioned, the location that the applicant could place a sign was limited due to a number of site constraints. So development of the site required a 5-foot right-of-way dedication, a 5-foot utility easement. That you also have the standard setback for signage. We have a 50-foot railroad and utility easement on the northern side of the site, and we have a private drainage easement on the entirety of the southern portion of the site. And so we were left with a pretty small area for the sign, and thus we have this grade issue. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to touch on some of the other signs in the area. These are not all, height, height variances or signs that exceed the standards of the low profile ground sign, but I did want to show kind of the various ways that different businesses have made their signs more visible in this area. So starting first with Family Dollar, which is adjacent, to this property, and it's at the corner of Atlantic Springs Road and Atlantic Avenue. They were able to place their sign on the retaining wall so that you have, increased visibility both along Atlantic Avenue and for those vehicles traveling south on Atlantic Springs. Due to the layout of our site, a retaining wall was not an option. You can also see that the grade between the sidewalk and the Family Dollar is much different than what we're facing on our property. But just wanted to again show a sign that, although is a low profile ground sign, is more physically imposing than what the applicant has done in this case. Next slide, please. This is the AmeriGlide sign on Atlantic Avenue. It is adjacent to the Family Dollar. Here again, you see a slightly raised, low-profile ground sign on that podium, not as tall as the Napa Auto Parts sign, but again, dealing with some of the visibility issues that you have when you're trying to advertise alongside a berm. Next slide, please. And lastly, this is the Atlantic Avenue Orchid and Garden. This is across Atlantic Avenue from Family Dollar and AmeriGlide. Again, this sign was pre-UDO and was in place before the PL frontage was in place, but you still see that there are a number of signs in the area that have taller signs and allow them to be seen by more folks, either by foot traffic or by car. And so just to conclude this presentation, so the requested variance is again to legalize that existing ground side and is required due to the grade from the sidewalk to the sign. When driving up Atlantic Springs Road, it does appear that our sign is a low profile ground sign, and only when you get closer do you see that it sits on that podium. The grade of the site is not the result of the applicant's actions. And the grade from the sidewalk to property here is somewhat unique in this location, considering the other properties that I just presented. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there is a public benefit to having a visible sign here. Having signs that visibly convey the information prevent folks from, again, having to double back along Atlantic Springs to come back after they missed it the first time, or again, from having to make an unsafe maneuver in order to turn into the property the first time. So having a raised sign here is necessary so that drivers can find that location safely their first time around. We do understand staff's desire for that pedestrian experience. We feel that this existing sign adheres to that goal by locating the sign at the same level as the sidewalk. And by that, I mean, the actual signage is fairly level with the sidewalk. Pedestrians are going to be able to easily identify the business, but more importantly, all of the customers traveling by car are going to have visible signage so that they can safely access the site as well. By placing the sign on the podium just tall enough to clear the grade differential, the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the PL sign regulations, such that substantial justice is achieved. If there are any questions from the board, I will be happy to answer those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mills. Thank you, Mr. Mills. Would you be willing to ask that your exhibit and application be submitted to the record?
Yes, sir. If you need me, do you need me to state that?
If you just, yes, I guess that's appropriate.
Oh, yes. So, yes, Mr. Swink, I would ask that the presentation and the materials we submitted be added to the record.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I seem to be getting my own echo now. I'm not sure where that came from. Okay, there were board questions for the applicant. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Mills? Okay, hearing none, there were no additional participants signed up to speak in either opposition or in support. So we'll move to our closing. Again, chance for board questions. Mr. Mills, anything further from you?
Much.
Mr. McDonald, anything further from you?
Not at this time.
Okay, then let's close the evidentiary hearing and move to our board deliberations. I'll certainly entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisil. We have a motion to approve. May I have a second, please? I'll offer the second. We have a motion and a second to approve. Is there any further discussion? Let's move to a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. On the motion, Ms. Rudisil?
Approve.
Thank you. Chairman Swank?
Approve.
Thank you. Mr. Kenny? I'm sorry, I'm a little off today. Sorry about that.
Take your time.
Sorry about that. Mr. Sutton?
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Coates.
Approve.
Thank you. That makes 5.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mills. Let's move along to our second evidentiary hearing. This is 900 Hillsborough Street, St. Mary's College of the property owners. This is variance BOA 0077-2020. Our participants to be sworn in, please state your name after I call it and your address for the record. Eric Poss.
Eric Poss, 118 East Park Drive.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And Russell Ward.
Yes, Ward Russell, Russell's last name.
Oh, my mistake.
That's
Thank you
okay.
for correcting.
No problem. 3304 Six Forks Road.
Okay. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you. Bear with me one moment. All right. So this is a request by the property owner, St. Mary's College of St. Mary's School located at 900 Hillsborough Street to the accessory structure rules for the OX mixed-use district, this office mixed-use district. So this is the school property, and I'll proceed to the next slide so you can see the kind of zoning configuration, which is unique, and I'll kind of walk you through why the request is being made to these specific standards and how this the specific zoning regime here was interpreted and the rules then applied. So it's split zoned. The vast majority of the property is zoned OX3, shown there in blue, and as part of the Cameron Park Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District transition area. However, a small segment of the property located in the, northwestern portion is zoned R6, Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District Cameron Park Core. However, the applicant's request is to essentially demolish an existing residence on this little piece that's at the edge of the campus. And they're looking to rebuild that structure into a new residence to be used by faculty and staff as housing. And so they came forth and had some discussions with the zoning administrator, and it was determined that this specific use would best be looked at as accessory to the civic use, which is located within the OX district, and thus it will be governed by the accessory structure rules to or within the OX district, which sets a maximum height for accessory structures at 25 feet. The applicant is requesting to build a structure that's 35 feet tall for a 10-foot variance. I will note that I believe some other potential solutions were explored, namely subdivision potentially of that piece. However, I do not believe this was desirable, nor would it be necessarily feasible because this small piece does not have any roadway frontage, which is a requirement for single family lots. And so the piece I'm talking about is right here. The other potential avenue was designating it as a detached house, which would not carry the same height limitations. But the code does define a detached house as a building constructed to accommodate one dwelling unit on a single lot. And this particular property as you can see here, is actually all located on one lot of record, such that you can't construct a detached house as defined in the zoning code on a lot that shares space with other principal buildings. So the best avenue forward was designated as an accessory structure. Again, the housing component being accessory to the principal use on the property, which is for civic/school-related activities. So that's kind of how they arrived at this particular request. Here is the structure that's going to be demolished. As you can see, it is landlocked at present, located behind, I believe, another residence of a similar design style. So they're just looking to rebuild this to accommodate their faculty and staff as on-site housing. Here's a elevation that was provided by the applicants showing the structure. It will be, again, a maximum of 35 feet in height, which does roughly align with both the kind of core and, the Cameron Park core and Cameron Park transition maximum building height requirements for principal buildings. So it won't be far out of line, but again, is taller than what's allowed as an accessory building within the OX district. So that concludes my presentation. Staff does not have any comments on any of the variance standards. I'm happy to answer any specific questions. The zoning administrator is also here if the board has any interest in hearing about the discussions that we had related to the determination on this property. But I'm here for questions, and if not, I'm happy to pass it off to the applicant.
Great. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Board members, do you have any questions for either of the staff members?
Yeah, John Coons, is there, maybe I missed it, did you provide the existing height of the structure at this point?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Did you provide, or can you give me the existing height of the structure as it exists today?
I do not have that readily available. I believe the applicant might have that information in their presentation, or I think they should be able to provide it for you.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, the applicant will now present evidence and legal arguments in support of the request. As a reminder to the applicant, any evidence and arguments must focus on the applicable standards. Welcome, Ms. Maddox.
Good afternoon. Isabel Maddox here on behalf of St. Mary's School. Also on the call with me are Eric Poss, Director of Facilities for St. Mary's School, and Ward Russell of Legacy Custom Homes, our builder. And as a preliminary matter, we will ask that you accept the application and presentation materials for the record.
Thank you.
As Mr. McDonald indicated, St. Mary's is requesting a height variance to allow for the construction of a new house in this location to accommodate either staff or faculty and their family. Since the house is a portion of the main St. Mary's school tract, is considered an accessory use serving the principal school use. First, if we can go to Exhibit 1, you can see the campus, and you can see that little arrow points to the area where the existing house is. Exhibit 2 is an aerial identifying the site as well. You can, yeah. And then if you can go to Exhibit 3, that is a photograph of the existing house. And you can see it's not in great shape. It's fairly obsolete. This was conveyed to the church, to the school in 1997. And then if you go to Exhibit 8, I have to scroll a little bit ahead here. You can see this house. This is the house that backs up. This fronts on East Park, backs up to the house. And if you go to the next exhibit, Exhibit 9, you'll see on the right side is the subject property. And you can see that little gate. That was the alley that previously served this house. And you can see the other side of the alley, which now basically just dead ends and is used as the driveway for the existing house fronting on Park. I just want to give you that view at one point, this house was accessed by that alley. In 1997, this property was recombined into the main tract, and the alley was eventually closed. The property now takes its access from the internal street that access public streets. So if you go back to Exhibit 1, you'll see that this property, you can see there's a network of streets on the campus, and they, would provide access to either Hillsborough Street, St. Mary Street, or College Place. Exhibit 3 shows you the zoning, and Keegan explained this pretty well, but I'll go back through it again. It's kind of an odd zoning that we have here. The main school tract is OX3 with Cameron Park transition NCOD. But our little tract is R6 with the Cameron Park core NCOD. The Cameron Park core NCOD allows a maximum height of 38 feet. So if this were considered a normal house on this very tract, we'd be allowed to have 38 feet of height. But since this is considered to be an accessory to the school use, we're limited to 25 feet. So strict application of the height maximum for accessory structures would prevent us from constructing what we think is a reasonable house size, which would be more attractive and more functional to serve the school, despite the fact that this height that we're proposing is consistent with both the Cameron Park neighborhood and the other buildings on the St. Mary's campus. And the St. Mary's campus is a unique mix of uses and buildings, and there are multiple buildings on this campus. They're not either the main building, but they're also not 25 feet or less. And so they're built sort of in a campus setting and not limited, not considered necessarily accessory structures, or if so, they were built before the 25-foot height limitation on accessories was imposed. The hardships don't result from the actions of the owner. St. Mary's has operated in its current location since 1842 and acquired the subject lot in 1997. And the UDO infill regulations were not imposed until 2013. We think this request is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. As I said, Cameron Park core overlay allows 38 feet height. Cameron Park transition overlay allows 40 feet maximum height. R6 allows 40 feet maximum height. Our request is for 35 feet. So we believe that the house will better conform to the character of the Cameron Park neighborhood and the existing buildings on St. Mary's than the current dilapidated house, which is vacant right now. And we believe that this requested variance will allow St. Mary's to construct a new house that it is in compliance with the height regulations for single-family homes in the area. It's in line with the character of the historic St. Mary's campus and the historic character of the homes in Cameron Park, and is much more functional and is aesthetically appealing. And as I said, our director of facilities and builder are available as I am for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Board members, do you have any questions for Ms. Maddox or for her witnesses? Mr. Kuntz, having seen the picture, are you satisfied, or do you want a detailed answer to your question?
Thanks for checking in. I think it gives me an adequate idea. If I missed that picture earlier, I apologize. I just want to make sure it wasn't that small of an answer, so we're good.
That's fine. Good question. Anyone else? Okay, no one else signed up either in support or in opposition, so we'll move to our closing statements, if any are needed. Ms. Maddox, anything further from you? Mr. McDonald, anything further from you?
Nothing super consequential. I did just want to note for the record that an earlier version of the agenda noted the applicable zoning district to this structure/request as NCOD Cameron Park transition, when in fact it is the core that's applicable here. However, this does not in any way invalidate the notice, as the request is to standard located in a separate part of the code for the OX district. I just wanted to note that discrepancy in case it came into question and make that note for the record.
Great. So thank you for that clarification. Ms. Maddox, would you add anything?
No, thank you.
Okay, great. In that case, let's close the evidentiary hearing and move to our deliberations. Like comments or a motion?
John Coons, motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Coons. We have a motion to approve. May I have a second?
Motion, second.
Thank you, Mr. Mile. We have a motion to approve and a second. Any further discussion? Then let's go to our roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Mr. Coons?
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Rittiso.
Approve.
Thank you. Mr. Sutton?
Approve.
Thank you. Chairman Swink?
Approve.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Maddox. Let's move along to our third evidentiary hearing today. This is 1430 Canterbury Road, Kimberly Whitley, property owner. It's a variance, BOA 0074-2020. Let me begin by swearing in Eric Hodge, our planning staff case presenter. Mr. Hodge, are you with us?
Present.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. And now our participants, we'll begin with Kimberly Whitley. Please state your name and address for the record.
Mr. Swink, I do not see Kimberly on with us at this.
Okay, do we have David Grace? Is David Grace with us?
Yes.
Would you state your name and address for the record, please?
David Grace, 2564 Hearthstone Circle, Marietta, Georgia.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Sam Wilson?
Present.
May I have your address, please?
Samantha Wilson, 2770 Dogwood Creek Parkway, Duluth, Georgia, 30096.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir. I do.
Thank you. And David Mason?
I'm here.
Your name and address, please, for the record.
312 Chris Mill Lane, Holly Springs, North Carolina. And Kim Whitley is joining me on the call. I notified Mr. Perez of her presence on the call with us sharing.
Okay, well, let me get you, and then I'll invite her to be sworn in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Ms. Whitley, could you give us your name and address for the record, please?
Kimberly Whitley, 1430 Canterbury Road, Raleigh, 27608.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Hodge.
So the request is for a 15-foot variance to the residential infill compatibility requirements stated in the current version of the Unified Development Ordinance for Section 2.2.7. The reason I state current version, this ordinance changed the end of 2020 via a text change known as TC 420, and the applicant's request is to that most recent version of the code. And they're seeking a 15-foot variance to the primary street setback as determined by the infill compatibility regulations in order to permit a primary street setback of 35 feet. That's a differential of 14 feet. However, they have upped their request by 1 foot to allow for some deviation if need be in the field. To add on to an existing detached home that's located on this 0.46 acre property, again, zone residential 4 and located at 1430 Canterbury Road. This is showing the block face that the current regulations would be deriving its comparative sample and ultimately the setback range that the applicant is subject to for those 3 homes immediately to the south of the subject property. So the ordinance tells us to essentially, you can go as close as the closest of those, or as far back as the furthest of those, or the median of those with a certain deviation based on the minimum lot width. Utilizing the method, which is at the choice of the applicant under the current regulation, this does reveal, again, a 14-foot variance. So they're seeking to locate the house 14 feet, but again, they've requested 15 feet to err on the side of caution, to go 15 feet closer to Canterbury Road than the ordinance for infill compatibility would otherwise allow. The current house, I would note, does conform. It's roughly 2,800 square foot home. They are seeking to add a garage as well as some other space onto the home, and that is what's necessitating this request for relief from this infill compatibility requirement, the desire to build closer to the street. This is just the aerial. This is a more recent shot showing the existing home a little clearer without the trees that were present in the earlier image. And the orientation of this slide, north is to the left instead of to the top. The red line toward the bottom of the screen is what the infill setback would ordinarily dictate. So the home would be no closer than 49 feet to Canterbury. Again, they're proposing to locate at that blue line at the 35-foot mark. This is an image showing the home. The majority of the addition is to the right in this image, and it does protrude in front of the existing home on the right side. These are the left and right elevations. The right elevation at the top, that image for the roughly the left half of that image is the majority of the addition and the portion that is subject to this variance. So underneath that large shed, 3-windowed shed dormer, that's kind of the area that we're talking about. And unless you have any other questions of me at this time, that would conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hodge. Any board member questions for Mr. Hodge? Okay, I'll invite Ms. Maddox. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon again. I'm here today on behalf of Kim Whitley, the applicant. Also on the line are Kim Whitley, David Mason, her fiance, and who's also in the development business and has been her consultant on this matter, as well as architects Samantha Wilson and David Grace. We would first ask that the application and presentation materials be submitted into the record.
Okay, thank you.
So we're requesting this variance to allow a primary street setback of 35 feet, as opposed to the 49 feet, which would be required under the infill regulations. If you look on Exhibit 1, and Eric showed this, you can see the current shape of this lot. Strict application of the infill regulations would prevent the redevelopment of this dwelling, despite the fact that this is consistent, the proposed project is consistent with the character and streetscape of the surrounding neighborhood. So the hardships that we suffer, as you can see in this exhibit, this lot is on a curve of Canterbury, which renders the lot shape irregular. And also the placement of the existing house is sort of at an angle, kind of addressing that curve. And the rear of the house is really right on the rear setback line. If you go to Exhibit 2, you can see that a little bit more clearly. And importantly, as you can see on Exhibit 2, the existing home, which was built in 1942, and since then it's been modified. But in 1990, the rear 85 feet of this lot were chopped off to create a new lot. So the lot immediately to the right in this picture was actually part of this lot. And if you go back to Exhibit 1, roll back to Exhibit 1, you can see the lot right beside it. You see how deep that lot is. This lot actually went back that deep as well before the rear 85 feet was cut off with a recombination or subdivision in 1990. That left almost no area behind the 30-foot rear setback line for any kind of addition back there. Ms. Whitley and her husband acquired the property exclusive of the 85 feet of backyard in 1993. If you'll go to Exhibit 3. Sadly, Mr. Whitley died in 2013. Since that time, Ms. Whitley has tried to move on with her life, and happily, she's recently become engaged, and she and her fiance, David Mason, are planning for a blended family. They'll now have 4 children in that house as opposed to 2, and they realize they need significantly more space and also want a home with significant ground level space so they can age in place. They have engaged Samantha Wilson and David Grace of a Classic Studio to design an enlarged home as shown on Exhibit 4. You go to Exhibit 4. In just a minute, I'll call David Grace to discuss his efforts to design a house which is compatible with the neighborhood. But first, I want to discuss the particulars of this request. Under the UDO, you look at the comparative sample. And so in Exhibit 5, you'll see that the 3 houses, which are to our immediate south, we look at those 3 setbacks. You've got 1428, 1424, and 1422 Canterbury. And you see there the 3 setbacks. And so you'll take the smallest one of those, which is 49 feet. So that becomes the requirement for this project, 49 feet. But we'll note that the R4 setback generally is 20 feet on the front. And we would be an additional 15 feet beyond that. So we would be providing 35 feet, even though the R4 general setback is 20 feet. And despite the infill rules, this is a very old neighborhood with greatly variable setbacks. To provide some more general context for the whole neighborhood, if we can go to Exhibit 7. This just shows several houses in the neighborhood. Top left corner, we have 2700 Churchill, which is 27 feet from the front setback. 1335 Mayfair, 1335 Mayfair is 30 feet front setback. 1236 Canterbury is 30 feet from the front setback. And 1234 Canterbury is 32 feet from the front setback. So you can see the nature of these homes. They're all pretty substantial homes that have been renovated or redone fairly recently, and they all have setbacks that are in the 27 to 32 feet range. So I would like to call David Grace, one of our architects, up to discuss the proposed project and how it was designed to be compatible with the character of the neighborhood and why it extends from the existing footprint.
Thank you, Isabel. So when we were looking at this project, it was very important for us to do something compatible with the neighborhood. We looked around the neighborhood, felt that there was a relatively low scaled architecture of cottage style. And so that's what we wanted to do as we expanded the square footage of the house. We kept it a story and a half. We did not create a two-story. One of the biggest concerns we had was we did not want to create some sort of McMansion feel. So we were keeping it a story and a half down. So we've got bedrooms tucked up under the roof. You can see that we've got sweeping. Maybe if we went back to Exhibit 4, just which is you can see that we've got a combination of dormers and windows tucked into these gables. So we don't have a true two-story massing. And we've also broken up the massing. So as the footprint got bigger, it didn't become a huge, massive block on the corner, but was kind of broken down into a pedestrian scaled structure that would be kind of friendly and inviting to people walking the neighborhood. As we also developed it, we wanted to develop detailing that was authentic and use authentic materials. So if you looked at the previous, the original house, it had false shutters on there that wouldn't cover the windows. And it's very charming. But we, as it got bigger, we wanted to make sure that our detailing was authentic. So if you go to Exhibit 4 again, we've got operable shutters that close and cover the windows. We've got a large living porch on the front, with French doors and timber posts and lanterns that would be very inviting and friendly to people walking the neighborhoods. We've got window boxes. We've got real brick and stone veneers. All giving this a very authentic feel. Carriage style garage doors and gooseneck lanterns. All that to say, we were trying to create something that was that felt right for the neighborhood. Because of this, our footprint spread out a little bit. David and Kimberly wanted to expand the house in a way that they could stay there over time. So it's very livable on the main floor. And what kind of led to us asking for this variance is they wanted a garage on the main level so that they could pull up to the house into the garage. It's really close to the kitchen without going up through a whole flight of stairs. There's really two locations we can enter the site. The two corners furthest away from the intersection. If we were looking at Lewis Farm Road as an entrance, we're actually coming into the existing driveway, which brings you in at the basement level. And that's where the existing foundation of the house is. If we were coming in from the other corner off of Canterbury Road, that was just the natural place. It's a little bit further from the intersection. It brings us up on the higher side of the site, closer to the new kitchen that we're adding. And so we can get a garage on that level. So that brought the front edge of that garage out over the Canterbury's front setback. So that's why we're in this position. We didn't have room to come out to the side or the rear or the front, and it's really just that portion of the garage that we're asking for, not the entire house. If you have any questions, or if you don't have any questions, I'll give this back to Isabel to continue her case.
Thank you, David. So we've discussed the hardships of the irregular shape of the lot, the location on a curve in Canterbury, the 1990 recombination that eliminated 85 feet of the backyard from the original lot, and the placement of the existing building on the lot, which hardships were not self-created. And we also have discussed that these infill regulations were imposed well after the house was built in 1942 and the lot was recombined in 1990, or subdivided actually in 1990, and after the Whitleys acquired the property in 1993. Now I want to confirm, based on Mr. Grace's testimony, that the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance, such that public safety is secured and substantial justice is achieved. The intent of the residential infill compatibility standards is to accommodate and encourage compatible development in existing residential neighborhoods while reinforcing the established character of the neighborhood and mitigating adverse impacts on adjacent homes. And so, as you've heard from Mr. Grace, we're proposing a project in a mature neighborhood which will be consistent in scale and character with the surrounding neighborhood and will improve the overall appearance of the property. And we've also indicated that many of the homes in the neighborhood were built well before the implementation of the infill setback requirements, that the surrounding neighborhood is not defined by a uniform streetscape or primary street setbacks. Instead, that building placement and street setbacks of neighboring property vary drastically even along this block. If you go back to Exhibit 1, if you look immediately opposite this house, 1431 Canterbury is set back 120 feet from Canterbury Road. And then 2 doors down, again, this is opposite side of the street, 1427 Canterbury has a primary street setback of less than 30 feet. So we feel like there's a lot of setbacks that vary quite a bit in this neighborhood. And we've done our best to design a house that will be compatible, will have an appropriate scale for the neighborhood. And we don't think the small intrusion into the front infill setback is in any way inconsistent with the established character of the neighborhood. And both I and my clients and the architects are available to answer any questions the board may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maddox. And board members, do you have any questions? Okay, hearing none. There was no one else signing up to speak in support or in opposition to this case. We'll move to our closing statements if any are needed. Mr. Hodge, anything further from you?
Nothing else from me at this time.
Okay, Ms. Maddox, I believe you wrapped yours up. Is there anything else for you though?
No.
And last chance for board questions. We'll close the evidentiary hearing and move to board deliberations now. Comments, or I'll entertain a motion. Anyone have any thoughts, concerns?
This is Mr. Mile. I made a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mile. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Rudisil. We have a motion to approve and a second. Is there any further discussion? And then let us move to our roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mile.
Approve.
Ms. Rudisil.
Approve.
Mr. Swink.
Approve.
Mr. Koontz.
Deny.
Mr. Sutton.
Approve.
Thank you. Vote is 4-1.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to our fourth evidentiary hearing. Ms. Richardson will be conducting this one.
Thank you, Mr. Swank. The address for this case is 209 Bickett Boulevard. The property owner is Dubayou LLC, and this is variance request BOA-75-2020. Collier Marsh will be representing the applicant, and there are 3 others signed up to speak for the applicant and 1 additional current person signed up to speak for this case. We will swear everyone in when they're called rather than doing it all at once for this case. And so at this time, we'll start with staff's presentation. Eric Hodge, I believe, is the staff presenter.
That's correct. This is a request for the following variances. 1, a variance of 7 parking spaces from the 7 parking spaces required by the Unified Development Ordinance, Section 712C and 711C3, to allow for a change in use of approximately 850 square feet of the existing building and rear patio area. The current use, I believe, is office for that space, and they're proposing to change that to restaurant. The second portion of the variance is a variance for complete relief from the UDO section 7.1 7.1.7, the vehicle parking lot landscaping requirements for the existing parking, 2 spaces at the rear of the site that will remain, and 3, a variance from 7 parking spaces from the 9 parking spaces that would be required by UDO section 7.1.2.c to legalize the site's existing parking that's in association with a change of use from an existing 1,092 square feet of restaurant use and 850 square feet of office use to 2 restaurant uses on the site with a combined 1,942 square feet of restaurant use and a maximum of 81 seats, with providing only 2 parking spaces on a 0.2 acre property zoned industrial mixed use 3, and as noted is located at 209 Bickett Boulevard. So the subject property is on the south side of Bickett Boulevard in the industrial zoning district, which is directly across the street from part of the 5 Points East Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District, which is shown in yellow with all the little home designs scattered thereover. Here's the aerial showing the property and the residential neighborhoods to the north. This is the site. There's currently some paved outdoor storage area and some existing asphalt parking at the northeast portion of the property in the upper right corner of this image. And then additionally, there's some parking in this gravel area at the southwest corner of the site. The gravel areas where some of the existing parking, I believe, that will be remaining would be located. This is a site plan showing the proposed and the existing. So there's existing office use at the front of the site and existing restaurant use at the rear. They're proposing to convert the entirety of that space to restaurant with 2 restaurant spaces therein. And probably in response to the current pandemic we're in, they're proposing to have a fair amount of outdoor seating as part of their proposed restaurant operation. And so these variances are taking into account that outdoor seating when they were determining their required parking. So that is factored into their variance request. This is the existing building. And again, basically a conversion to a second restaurant with a fairly hefty parking reduction. However, the site does have some constraints, and I'll let the applicants go into more detail about that. We have seen similar requests in other areas near residential neighborhoods for changes of use. And in the past, the board has oftentimes imposed conditions of approval related to hours of operation, given the fact that looks like the majority of their parking will be utilizing on-street parking spaces, and therein immediately across the street is a residential neighborhood. So that may be something the board wishes to consider here as the applicants, not officially as part of their application, but through conversations have indicated that it is their intent to not operate past 11 p.m., but that may be something worth considering as a recommended condition of approval. Unless you have any conditions of me at this time, that would conclude staff's presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hodge. Does the board have any questions for him? Okay. So Mr. Marsh will now present the evidence and legal arguments in support of the request. And as the attorney for the applicant, he does not need sworn in. However, if there are others that are going to speak, Mr. Marsh, please let us know and we'll have them sworn in at that time.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Richardson. We do have 3 folks on our team that will testify. So would you like to swear them in right now?
Yeah, that'll work.
It will be Jason Meadows, Meredith Kirkpatrick, and David Baker.
All right. Mr. Meadows, please state your name and address, and Mr. Swink will swear you in.
Jason Meadows, address is 8771 Cleveland Road, Clayton, NC 27520.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. Ms. Kirkpatrick, can you please state your name and your address, and Mr. Swink will swear you in.
Yes, Meredith Kirkpatrick, 115 and a half East Target Street, Suite 300, Raleigh, 27601.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. And Mr. Meeker, can you please state your name and address?
Yeah, David Meeker, 601 Virginia Avenue, Raleigh, 27604.
Mr. Meeker, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
All right. This is Collier Marsh again. Good afternoon, Ms. Richardson, Mr. Chair, and members of the board. I'm with Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein at 301 Fayetteville Street, and we represent the applicant in this request. I'd like to start by asking that our application, presentation, case report, and supporting materials be accepted into the record. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So as Eric already explained, this variance relates to a proposed change in use for part of 209 Bickett Boulevard, which we see the entrance to the building shown on this slide here. The change in use triggers additional parking requirements that cannot be met here, and we'll explain exactly why. We're also seeking to confirm the legal status of the site's existing parking in order to eliminate any ambiguity in the parking requirements moving forward. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at an aerial view of 209 Bickett Boulevard. It's outlined in red. As you can see, this is a small site. It's a 0.2 acre parcel, and it's zoned IX3. The property is in a transitional area immediately adjacent to industrial uses on either side, and some more intense industrial uses to the south, and also some railroad tracks abutting the property to the south as well. To the north, we have some residential neighborhoods, including the 5 Points neighborhood. The existing structure on the site was built in 1959. It's a total of 1,942 square feet that, as you can see here, takes up most of the site. Today, the building has 2 uses. On the front half, there's a 1,092 square foot restaurant, the Sweet Anisette Bakery. That's a neighborhood bakery and coffee shop. And then in the rear, there's 850 square feet, which is currently used as office space. It's had some different uses over the years. Our variance relates to a proposed change to replace the office space, that 850 square foot space, with a second complementary restaurant use, which results in 1,942 square feet of combined restaurant space. And then we're proposing some accompanying outdoor seating. The parking requirements here, they're driven by the total number of seats rather than the square footage. So our request contemplates a maximum number of seats of 81 seats. That's indoor and outdoor. It's likely that we'll have less seating, but that's the most that could fit. And so in order to ensure that we're permitting the appropriate amount of relief, we've requested the relief for a total of 81 seats. That results in 16 spaces total required for the site. If you could actually go back to the first slide for 1 second. Yeah, so as you can see in this aerial photo, although you see vehicles parked in different places on the site and on the neighboring sites, I think because of the time these sites were developed before UDO standards, parking maybe it was applied a bit differently. But under current UDO standards, there are really only 2 true parking spaces on the site. And that's where, near where that red car is shown at the top of the image there, there'd be 2 spaces that could be located pointing east on the site. So in both the current configuration and then the proposed change in use, that remains the same, the two sites, the two parking spaces. We don't propose any changes to the building structure, the building location, and expansions. It's merely just a change in use. But this change in use does trigger the UDO parking requirements. So next slide, please. So we need 3 variances in order to confirm this change of use. The first variance seeks relief from the 7 additional parking spaces that are required for this new restaurant use. So under UDO 7.1.1C3, that requires compliance for the difference in parking between the current use and the proposed new use. So here, with the new use, it triggers an additional 7 spaces. And so we're seeking relief from that additional 7 spaces with this first request. The second variance seeks relief from the vehicle parking lot landscaping requirements. If you look to the front of the building where those spaces are, it's fully paved. There's no location for landscaping. And in order to maintain the existing parking spaces, we're seeking relief from those landscaping requirements. Then the third variance that we're seeking seeks to confirm the legal status of the site's existing parking. So under the current uses, the UDO requires a total of 9 spaces. We're only providing 2 spaces. That's all that's available on the site. So we're seeking a 7-space variance. Now, based on the age of the building being over 60 years and the history of uses of the site, it's likely that the existing parking is a legal nonconformity and that this third variance may not be necessary, but we haven't been able to trace the history of all the uses and the different requirements at different times to confirm that legal status. So in an abundance of caution, we're seeking to confirm the existing legal status of the parking. All 3 variances are justified under the UDO standards, and we're prepared to present evidence on each. Next slide, please. So I'd like to call our first witness. I'd like to call David Meeker of Carpenter Real Estate. David, if you could state your name, address, your education, and your experience for the board.
Sure. So David Meeker, 601 Virginia Avenue, Raleigh, 27604. I think the experience that's important here is I'm a partner in Trophy Brewing. We have 3 locations, 2 in neighborhoods, one on Morgan Street, one on Maywood Avenue. And then we also have State of Beer on Hillsborough Street. I'm also involved with Irregardless on West Morgan Street, in Beasley's Chicken and Honey downtown, more as a real estate partner, but I know those businesses well. And then I'm good friends with the owners of Stanberry. So I've gotten to see their model work and evolve. And I think that's probably the most similar concept to this one in terms of neighborhood proximity.
At this time, I'd like to tender Mr. Meeker as an expert in restaurant development and operations.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. David, could you please explain the proposed change in use and why this site is an appropriate location for this project?
Yes. So as Collier mentioned, Anisette Coffee and Bakery is going to stay at the front of the building. That's been successful, and I think is a nice amenity to the neighborhood. In the back, the Garland owners are going to do a riff off Garland there. For those of y'all who don't know them, Garland is done by James Beard finalist Chidi Kumar and her husband Paul Seiler. They're pillars in the food world in Raleigh, and they'll do a nice concept. There's office there now, and we're going to change that to restaurant to create a total of 1,942 square feet and a max of 81 seats. Most likely less, but that's the maximum allowed. The COVID era has changed the restaurant model, as you all know, and it's pushed it more to an outdoor model. So a lot of the seats shown here are outdoors, and that'll allow the restaurant to be successful and for patrons to feel safe. This will not be a loud or a late model. It won't be a late concept at night, but a similar concept to Stanberry, which really has been successful across the street from a residential use, just like this one. Stanberry does a really great cocktail and dinner business, and then fades early. A couple precedents I think are worth mentioning. One is our Trophy Brewing on Morgan location received a very similar variance to this, where we went to 0 required parking spots. And that allowed us to open and be successful. I think has been a nice amenity for that neighborhood there. And then second is 5 Points as a precedent, or is a precedent of a neighborhood that really supports its businesses. The neighbors there walk to the 5 Points intersection businesses, as well as the breweries and other businesses down the hill, and really support those businesses and allow them to be successful. We're hopeful the same thing happens here, where we're a neighborhood businesses, a business with people walking there, and that's the reason we do well. The motivations are really aligned here. You know, we as the restaurant need the neighbors to support us, and we hope to make the neighborhood more fun for the neighbors who live there, and maybe even potentially make the neighborhood more valuable when the folks who live there go to sell. Maybe they can get a little more money for their property. But the goal here would be to have it be a nice amenity for the neighborhood, and us be successful because the neighborhood supports us.
David, in your experience operating restaurants near residential settings where there's reduced parking, is it your experience that a concept such as the one proposed here can operate in harmony with the surrounding neighborhood?
Yes, and that's really the only way it can operate. You know, you need to be, you need to get along with all the neighbors. You need to have a plan that works for everybody, and you really need a lot of the neighbors walking over. That's why it's successful. That's why this concept, we sort of built it to be neighborhood focused, and I think it'll do well here.
Great, thank you, David. Next slide, please. So next, I would like to call Jason Meadows. Jason, could you please state your name, your address, your education, and your experience for the board?
Sure. Jason Meadows, 8771 Cleveland Road, Clayton, NC 27520. Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering from NC State University, and I'm a professional civil engineer in the state of North Carolina.
At this time, I'd like to tender Mr. Meadows as an expert in civil engineering and site design.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, Jason, could you please explain the site constraints on the property that necessitate this variance request?
Sure. As you can see, and as previously mentioned by Mr. Marsh, the site is currently constrained by its existing parcel configuration, as well as the existing built environment, both on the site as well as on the adjacent properties surrounding it. As you can see in the aerial exhibit, the existing properties to both our east and west generally are built in close proximity to our property lines, and the site only consists of approximately 0.2 acres in size. As such, there are additional spaces shown in that aerial, but those are not conforming spaces and do not meet UDO requirements. The only two closely conforming spaces for parking would be those two in the front, as Mr. Marsh indicated, by that red vehicle on the front elevation of the building. So that being said, we're providing the maximum amount of parking on site within the constraints that we have. And there also are on-street parking available to us in the general vicinity of the site that will be utilized for the business during our peak hours, and provide some additional on-street parking there as well.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Next slide, please. So I'd like to quickly summarize our evidence, explain how we meet the variance findings, and then make our witnesses available for questions by the board. First, unnecessary hardship would result from the strict application of the ordinance. Here, the strict application of the ordinance would prevent the proposed change of use to the existing building. Compliance to meet the parking space requirements is simply not feasible due to the site constraints in existing building locations. And given the substantial site constraints, really any change in use would require a variance, or if we're starting from scratch here, any use of this building, given the size of the building, but the limited lot size and parking area, would require some form of variance. So constructed in 1959, it just did not contemplate the current UDO requirements. The hardship results from conditions peculiar to the property. Again, this relates to the size of the property, the shape, that wedge shape. It's only 0.2 acres. And the building constructed in 1959 was not constructed with meeting current UDO parking requirements with that in mind. Hardship did not result from actions taken by the applicant. The existing site constraints all existed prior to this request. Last, the requested variance is consistent with the spirit, purpose, and intent of the ordinance. It's consistent with the ordinance for a number of reasons. First, the requested relief would facilitate the reuse of the existing building instead of demolition of the building. The site, it's an industrial area. There are a lot of more intense uses surrounding it. And we believe that the city and the board should welcome the proposed neighborhood-friendly uses that would be more compatible and serve as a better transition to the neighborhood area. The site is zoned IX3, so in theory, it could be redeveloped to a 3-story development of sorts that would be much more intense. And we think it's more neighborhood friendly to encourage the redevelopment of the existing site as it is today. This request is also consistent because the board has acknowledged that the UDO parking requirements are not a one-size-fits-all and has regularly granted similar requests. And a few examples to cite, Mr. Meeker cited the Trophy Brewing variance as an example where the variance that was granted permitted no off-site parking whatsoever, so a complete relief from the off-street parking requirements. BOA 0037-2020, it granted extensive variances in design alternates, including a 35-space variance from the parking requirements in order to provide only 5 spaces. So roughly similar proportions of relief granted. That was in October of 2020. And then case A133-19, there are 82 spaces of relief granted in December of 2019. So there are several precedents in the city where similar relief was granted. Then there are also changed circumstances here that were not contemplated when the UDO was adopted. The elephant in the room, as the result of COVID, an unprecedented number of local businesses have gone out of business and are trying to find new ways to adapt. And this is a way to adapt for local business owners. We're looking at a site where there's an opportunity to have a greater amount of outdoor dining rather than indoor dining to provide a safe environment for folks to eat and dine. The city has already responded to these changed circumstances in a number of ways. But the best example I can think of is if you look to downtown Raleigh, where there are restaurants that have no off-street parking provided whatsoever. The city adapted to these changing circumstances and put outdoor dining areas in the on-street parking locations. So again, acknowledging the need to adapt to reduce parking in order to have successful restaurant uses in the city. The last item I'd like to note is that we have submitted notarized letters to city staff and to city council in support of this request, 2 letters from neighbors in support. With that, we respectfully request that the board approve our requested variances and are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Does the board have any questions for the applicant?
Yes, thank you. I have a couple clarification questions. I've been studying the drawing. I think I finally figured out that the dining is in the back of the building. That's correct?
So the existing bakery is in the front and the proposed use would have some dining in the rear and then, I guess, moving out to a rear patio area.
Right. How many employees are you anticipating these 2 operations to need on a daily basis?
Mr. Meeker, do you have that information?
Sure. Yeah, 8 to 10 employees.
Where will employees be parking, or have you anticipated that?
They most likely within 3 or 4 blocks, or potentially we could get them to bike or walk. We hadn't discussed that, but we would not have them park right in front of the restaurant.
Have you figured out your hours of operation yet?
Not exactly, but I think you could, Anisette will be open. It'll be, a 12-hour business, 8 to 8 or 8 to 9 or 8 to 10. So.
And last question for me. I know you asked for a waiver on parking landscaping. Will there be any landscaping on the site?
Jason, do you have the answer to that? I think Chairman Swink, the existing front location is fully paved, so there may be plantings and things like that, but not the planted in-ground trees that would be what is triggered by the UDO. Jason, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, the site is currently generally paved from edge to edge of in the parking area in the front.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the board? Okay, we have one person signed up to speak in opposition of this case, and that is Carol Myrie.
Carol Mayer. Thank you.
Ms. Mayer, will you please state your name and address? Chairman Swink will swear you in.
Sure. Carol Mayer, 1516 Hanover Street, Raleigh, 27608.
Okay, Ms. Mayer, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, Ms. Mayer. And just as a reminder, please focus your testimony and evidence on the applicable standards for the variance.
Yes, I'll try my best. First, let me say that I and the neighbors that I've talked to on Hanover Street, which is just around the corner, are very supportive of the restaurant. And especially a restaurant, in the vein of Garland. So there's no concern about the restaurant. There are two concerns. One is one of the neighbors directly facing the restaurant has a concern about noise at night, and we understood that the restaurant was to be open until 11. So speaking on their behalf, because they did not sign up in time, they were concerned about the noise. And also we have a concern about if a future tenant goes in that space, I understand that they could stay open later. So we were wondering if it's possible to condition to a specific time period that the restaurant would be open until. The second concern is parking. So if in looking at this diagram here, you see where the building is. You go to the Bickett Street, go right. That first street going north is Hanover Street. Hanover is, and this is where I live, 1 block long, 30 houses, 54 cars. Almost half of them park on the street, and we have to currently stagger or zigzag how we park because the people with driveways can't get out if we don't do that. So the point is that we already have a parking problem. Some neighbors have already backed out of their driveways and hit their neighbors across the street. So our concern is with the 81 seats, plus I think was just said 8 to 10 employees, plus maybe a small number of Anisette people parking there as well. The street side parking only provides for 9 spaces. We measured that using 20 feet, which I understood was the city standard of 18 feet plus 2 feet to allow pulling in and out. So street side's only 9 parking spaces. So our concern is that people will pull into Hanover, park there, and cause additional parking problems for people. We experienced that hardship previously in the same location, one building to the left, when it was Bickett Gallery, which was an art gallery and a bar, and then also another business was there, Wine and Design. And while the businesses were terrific, the patrons did park on Hanover and cause people to be blocked in and people to be blocked in their driveways. So our ask, if it's possible, is to ask the restaurant to provide some kind of dedicated parking for its patrons. The parking spaces in front of the other small businesses that are there, there are 18 of them. And also the big building on the corner, which used to be the Grocery Boy location, they have an additional 15 spaces. So if this is just one idea to throw out, but if arrangements could be made for the restaurant patrons to park there at night because there are no other events there at night, that would prevent people from coming into the neighborhood, very small Hanover Street. I wanted to ask, maybe I didn't hear it earlier, but have any arrangements been explored for providing any kind of dedicated parking?
When we come back to the applicant, I would just ask that he address that.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure what I could do here. So our request is basically that could the restaurant consider providing some kind of dedicated parking and potentially also putting some signage to say, you know, parking here, not on Hanover, or perhaps Hanover Street could have some signage that says restaurant parking only, something like that. And again, this is based on our historical experience with two similar businesses. Those are my comments. I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Merritt. Does the board have any questions for Ms. Merritt?
I would ask one regarding the hours of operation. Do you have, you suggested that you'd like to see something in that regard. Do you have times in mind? Ms. Mayor?
Is that to me, Mr. Swain?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Mayor, do you have times in mind about when you would like to see this operate or not be operating?
The neighbor that had that primary concern who faces it mentioned 9 p.m. I don't know if that's reasonable or not, but I think another accommodation would be, you know, some way to manage the noise so it doesn't directly impact the people across the street.
Thank you.
So no, there wasn't a specific consensus other than the one neighbor mentioning 9 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the board? All right, Mr. Marsh, do you have any questions for Ms. Mayer?
I do not have any questions, but I'd like to respond to a few of those points.
Okay. We'll go ahead. You can go ahead and do that now.
Okay, thank you. So I guess breaking it down into two items, the one I heard was hours of operation and the impact on neighbors. I will say that we have spoken with neighbors in the area. We mentioned letters in support. We also have spoken with the neighbor directly across the street who I understand is excited about this project. But to directly hit this point, we would be willing to condition consistent with the other variances seeking similar relief to limit the hours of operation to a closing time of 11 p.m., which I believe is what was granted in case A13319 and perhaps BOA 37-2020. I know at least one, if not both of those, had an 11 p.m. condition, and so we'd be willing to commit to that. As far as testimony regarding available parking in the area, I do think that the testimony we just heard is illustrative as to how this could work. The amount of parking on the street is greater than what we're seeking relief from for this new proposed use. We also heard testimony that some of the other sites nearby have ample parking to meet the needs of those uses, which are somewhat less, I guess, or somewhat underparked in the current state. We are interested in exploring ways to park at neighboring properties, but are unable to offer a condition to that effect at this time. But that doesn't foreclose the opportunity, and it's something that I think the business owners would pursue regardless. So I think we have heard competent material and substantial testimony, or substantial evidence through the testimony of two expert witnesses that there are substantial site constraints that warrant the requested relief here. And also that similar businesses have succeeded in other locations and similar residential bordering locations have succeeded and have been good neighbors and have fit in well with the community. So with that, we'd respectfully request that the board approve our variances.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Does the board have any further questions? All right, does staff have anything further? Mr. Hodge?
Sorry, I didn't realize that had been muted. No additional comments at this time. Thank you.
Okay. With that, I will go ahead and close the evidentiary hearing, and I'll give it back to Mr. Swink for board deliberations and the vote.
Okay, thank you. Let's open it up for comments and a motion. I would begin by saying that personally, I think this is a nice idea. It's nice to see a repurposed building. It's nice to be thinking about neighborhood restaurants, neighborhood options. It's nice that we can do that. So I'm pleased to see that. I understand the parking concerns. I think those are legitimate. Neighborhoods do get sometimes abused in that regard, but we have granted variances recently based on the belief that the neighborhoods will be the primary users. So I'm somewhat comfortable with that. I would like to hope that the owners are in fact going to look around to see if they can get some agreements with neighbors about parking, particularly in the evenings. It might be its highest use. And then I'd love to see a little more energy and enthusiasm for some landscape. And even if it's plants in pots, I think you can make a place a little more amenable. And I hope you're thinking that. You don't have to respond now, but I just think that's a threshold comfort that we ought to be thinking about. With that, I would like to propose a condition, but I'll hold that condition regarding hours of operation, but I'll hold that condition subject to anyone else's comments.
Hey, go ahead, Kathy. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I just think we need to address the parking issue and try to make some workable condition that is okay. Well, doesn't restrict too much the restaurant, but also protect the residents who live in that area.
Mr. Coons?
Yeah, I mean, the parking itself's a hot button with me, and I may differ than some people, but you know, I have a pet peeve of mine is the you know, when the parking requirements dictated by a change of use. You know, I think as we grow in the city and really strive for density and walkability, you've got this parking requirement that, in my experience, and we've seen other cases come before us that really hamstring adaptive reuse, which is I think critical as we grow smartly as a city. The pedestrian walkability, as we try to promote these things, it's hard to do both, and I certainly get there's a balance that we strive for. If I could think of a team that's behind a restaurant that I think is probably all over that. I don't know the full team, but I think they're probably doing the right things in the background to do it. Having said that, this thing's not live yet, so we hadn't seen it. So, I'm a staunch believer in getting rid of a lot of these parking requirements. So that's where my vote's going to go. I'm going to vote for, approval without conditions, although I can probably get on board with some sort of cap, on the time limit, or as 11 o'clock or something like that. I think that's probably a balance that's probably strivable or achievable from the ownership group. So that's where my head is. I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else for comment? Well, I will go ahead and say this, and then anyone else can come back in. I think that I would propose a condition that the operations close at 11 p.m., at least by 11 p.m. They may choose to close earlier, that's their choice, but at least by 11 p.m. I think that is respectful of the neighborhood. So that's my one condition. So anyone else have some comments? Mr. Sutton, I see you lean forward. Did you something?
Yes, I was going to just put forth, I think the precedent that was discussed, there were conditions that were imposed. Certainly, I cannot recall what those conditions were, and moving forward with this particular project, I would certainly recommend the imposition of a certain condition. Also, had we addressed or had the issue of increased capacity been addressed, with this, I guess, with this notion or this waiver of parking availability. My concern is mostly the health and the safety of the patrons, of course. And with this waiver on parking, are we taking exception to certain or certain areas that would impact certain patrons' health and safety? I guess as far as availability and space. So that was just those 2 points I kind of wanted to address, kind of bring to the attention of the board. Other than that, I would strongly suggest a condition of some sort. We could discuss that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sutton. Anyone else?
Yes, it's Ms. Mile.
Yes, sir.
My concern, of course, with everything going with the walkability, that's the prime word now that's going on around the capital city. So that's definitely a concern there. And of course, the parking space. And I would also be inclined to go along with looking at some type of time frame and possibly 11 there in terms of time for the restaurant to close. I think once you lose community and you're getting past 11 o'clock, that could be disturbing. So I'll be inclined to support based on those two objectives.
Okay, thank you. So I have not actually made a motion. I've suggested a condition. I'm happy to make a motion, but I want to be sure everyone has a chance to speak. Is there anyone else who wishes to offer a comment? And specifically, Ms. Russell? No? Okay. Well, then let me get the ball rolling here. I move approval with a condition that the restaurant operations close by 11 p.m. Each evening. So we have a motion.
I think you need to be more specific. I mean, if this thing were to evolve, into a full-scale bar, I think you need to say the establishment, not just restaurant. I mean, to be clear.
Okay, I will accept that. Let me amend my motion or withdraw and restate my motion that the business establishments at this location close by 11 p.m. And I move approval with that condition. So look for other comments or actually like a second.
Read the motion one more time. I'm sorry.
The motion is to approve with the condition that the establishments at this address close by 11 p.m.
Okay.
This is Ms. Mile. I will go ahead in a second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Now, further discussion.
Question on just a point of clarification. Is this condition to be in perpetuity for this address?
Thank you for the question. I thought when we put conditions, they were in perpetuity, but.
I mean, it goes with the property, right, Janie?
Correct, yeah. The conditions will run with the property title, so.
Okay. Okay.
This can always be further amended if needed, but I mean, what you're saying is right now, that's what we want to do. Okay.
Okay. That's, all right. Thank you for the question. Okay. Still further discussion?
One question. Didn't we run into this issue maybe like 6 or 9 months ago on one of these things where we ended up getting in the weeds about what do we mean when you say the business closes by 11? Just so there's clarity, will patrons be able to linger and finish meals and drinks and things like that? Or are we proposing that literally the doors are shut and everybody's out at 11? I swear I think we got into that on one of these and had some sort of language addressing it.
Well, I'm guessing we need a legal interpretation of closes by 11. Someone needs to help us with that. Do we have that answer?
I'm not sure if you all want to be specific about, whether or not it will be that like last call would be at 11 or whether all patrons must be out of the establishment by 11. I think, that would be fine if you want to be more specific.
I think in fairness, you got to look at the intent. I mean, we're trying to do away with noise and traffic out there. I mean, you and I both know you could stop serving at 11 and it could go on to 1:30 in the morning, which I think is probably not the intent. And I know would not probably sit well with the neighbors. So I think it's probably closed to the public at 11, or I don't know what word you want to use, but I gather that's the intent of the board, right?
I agree with that interpretation. I'm not sure how we get that in a motion, condition. If someone can help me with that language.
Would you like to propose it based on the hours of operation?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at, yeah.
So Mr. Swing, to state your motion again and base the closure on the hours of operation.
Okay. Then to clarify the motion, this would be approval with a condition that the hours of operations cease by 11 p.m. Mr. Mile, do you accept that?
I do.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Thank you, Mr. Randy, for that clarification. Any further discussion?
I know in the past we've floated some of these by the applicant before we voted. Is that something we want to do? Let's say, hey, look, or do we not do that?
Well, I understand your question. I did hear the applicant say in his presentation that they were willing to consider a condition regarding the hours. And I think they actually even mentioned 11 o'clock.
There's a lot there. I just want to make sure. Okay, I'm good.
Okay, further discussion? Then let us move to a roll call vote, please.
Okay, on the vote, Chairman Swink,
Approve.
Mr. Mile,
Approve.
Mr. Coons,
Approve.
Ms. Rudisill,
Approve.
Mr. Sutton.
Denied.
Okay, that makes 4-1.
Okay, thank you very much, folks. Thank you. Let us move along to our approval of the minutes from our January 11th, 2021 meeting. They were all part of the packet. A motion to approve offered.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve. Mr. Coots, is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Mile, roll call vote on this one, please.
Yes, sir. Mr. Coons,
Approve.
Mr. Mile,
Approve.
Chairman Swink,
Approve.
Ms. Rudisill,
Approve.
Mr. Sutton.
Approved.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Janie, anything from you to report today?
Nothing for me today.
Okay, anyone else have anything to report for the group? All right, well, good discussion today, interesting cases. So thank you all. Thank you for weighing in, and we will stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Talk to you in a month. Stay safe.
All right, take care.
Thanks, everyone.